Welcome to a special edition episode of Understandable Insights, Information to Intelligence with Sue Gordon. In this bonus episode, we'll discuss dogfighting satellites and a new NASA boss. Missile defense constellation space is going from frontier to battlefield and critical infrastructure, fast. This conversation was recorded on December 29th, 2025, and first appeared in the extended YouTube cut of episode 24. In a new analysis arguing that low Earth orbit, or LEO, has become a, quote, house of cards because satellite mega-constellations now experience frequent close passes, a close approach defined as two satellites passing by at less than 1 kilometer of separation. Using this crash clock metric that these analysts developed, they estimate that if operators lost maneuver control, a catastrophic collision could occur roughly 2.8 days. This is down from roughly 121 days in 2018. And even a 24-hour loss of control carries about a 30% chance of a major collision that could kick off a Kessler syndrome debris cascade. For Starlink alone, that number is about every 11 minutes that they have a close call. And another metric for Starlink is that each of their thousands of satellites has to perform 41 maneuvers per year to avoid running into other objects in their orbit. So we've talked about space as a form of infrastructure before and the need for a better traffic collision and traffic management system, but this kind of puts some numbers on it. Is this time for us to act?
I'm so glad you said the word time. Such an interesting construct where we keep thinking about congestion and space traffic management. The real issue is time. It's just moving so fast, the decisions that need to be made are distributed across many stakeholders, and they happen in time frames that you actually can't have a human involvement. And so it's going to be algorithms making the decisions. And these are untested, unproven across it. So we're moving from space being a domain to space being a dependency. And then within the environment itself, there are a lot of dependencies on what everyone does. So it's absolutely time to act, although the action is hard to imagine how we're going to get there from where we are because we love building things. We really do. We love technology. We love capability, but we really lag in terms of governance and regulation and policy, particularly across stakeholders that are in completely different silos of how we act singularly as a nation. And we're really proud of the separation between government and the private sector. That is becoming problematic with space as well. So absolutely time to act, but we need to think about it differently than avoiding collisions, and that is how are we going to coordinate a massively used space such that decisions can be made in a time frame that keeps the crisis that you articulated from happening. We're not yet focusing on that, and so it's certainly the time to, but I'm not sure that just space management itself is going to be enough. It's got to be kind of policies and hierarchies, and then what are the algorithms governing it, and who's the one that's validating, and what are the rules of who gets precedence. And this is just when it's a benign environment. When you start being concerned that people are going to be acting aggressively in that space, again, who are you allowing to make the decisions about how you avoid accident? So certainly time to act, but we need to act from a decision-making perspective rather than from just a management perspective.
It seems like the technology is either there or we're right on the precipice using AI to help manage some of this deconfliction. That's one of the big advocacies for future of self-driving cars is using the computers for traffic management and rerouting. You're going to have a safer environment because the computers are controlling it, and also traffic management, deciding routes and congestion. But to your point of priorities, right? Everybody's going to be fighting for the space. It's a big space, but you're fighting for priority location over the equator, and Starlink fighting against Amazon to provide their services. You're soon going to wind up with competition, not just in the military and national security domain, but the commercial domain, and setting those priorities and who gets that real estate.
Right. Now we're coming to the point that there just isn't a line. You're right. You've got Amazon's Kuiper, Starlink, OneWeb, Eutelsat, and infinite more up there that are commercial systems. There are bands of where the activity is, but there are also military systems in there. And so I think we're still holding on to this separation between commercial, civil, and military. And if this is going to work, and I agree with you, self-driving cars are going to have many, many fewer accidents than human-driven cars are going to be. But look how much time it's taking to get there. And we have all these roads mapped, and we have laws that govern who has right of way and how things happen. And so you're right that technology is there. I'm just not sure we've done the work to have all the parameters of decision making that will make that technology have the same near-term potential that the self-driving cars do. And I'm a self-driving car fan. I love me a Waymo through Uber. We can get to this as a much bigger topic about AI in general, but it's not about the action, it's about the accountability. And I think we're really far away in space from having that sorted. So to your initial question, what's it time for? It's time for us to be serious about our space policy, space governance, and interaction between military, civilian, and commercial.
Well, someone who helps set that policy between the government and the civilian is the new NASA administrator.
Yep.
So, billionaire entrepreneur and private astronaut Jarek Isaacman was just confirmed by the Senate in a 67-30 vote. He's a SpaceX veteran who has flown on missions, and his appointment was previously rescinded for a bit during the Musk-Trump fallout because his affiliation with SpaceX, but he's back in and been confirmed. He's a bit controversial, in part because of his ties to Elon Musk and SpaceX and their massive role in future NASA contracts, but he said he'll avoid conflicts as he pushes a more commercial, get results approach. So some of his near-term ambitions get Artemis moving. He's emphasized the urgency around getting Artemis 2 on the launch pad and keeping our track back to the moon. He's doing a big bet on nuclear propulsion, so he's explicitly advocated ramping urgency and investment in nuclear electric thermal propulsion as the kind of near impossible work that NASA should lead. He wants to make NASA flatter, less bureaucracy, more doers, got it. Science, keep it, but make it cheaper and faster. He's described a push towards more frequent, lower-cost missions, greater use of commercial services when possible, and a willingness to accept more risk on uncrewed efforts to keep schedule and budget. And finally, a bigger space economy goal. He's talked about NASA helping industry scale low Earth orbit, LEO commercialization, with ISS as a bridge for commercial stations, and then handing off mature capabilities to the private sector once NASA approves them. Sue, what do you think about some of the vision for NASA 2026?
Not a personal commentary. I think his biggest job is to figure out what lane NASA's going to be in. What's its role going to be? What's his vision for it? I think it's a much bigger question than all the small things that he said. And then as you listed his set of visions and accomplishments, it's a little bit the same thing I have every time President Trump speaks. I want to just yell at the screen to say what's new to you is not necessarily new. There isn't a single thing on his list that NASA hasn't been working at. You want to know who's done a good job with using the commercial sector for real accomplishments? It's NASA, far better than the national security community has done. So the national security has a really hard time imagining how they give actual requirements and let the competitive forces work on them. It's having a hard time, but NASA has done that really well. The International Space Station has already proven an exemplar of how you can have infrastructure in space. And there are companies from Sierra Space to others who have recognized that space can be the infrastructure for human activities on Earth, and space stations are a way to go. So almost everything on his list. So to make NASA flatter, less bureaucracy and more doers, yay. Do you know how you get that? It's a combination of quest and dollars. So a really clear vision of what you're going to do. These are all activities rather than outcomes that you want to have. What is NASA going to be? And then you got to resource it. And if you've got great quests and you have great resourcing, talent will follow that. So I don't know, what are you going to do? Just, say faster, faster to the people that are already there. Or you have to do something structurally much more interesting in order to get the things you want. These are all fine things. None of them are new. Every one of his predecessors have tried them. That they still need to be done means that I think there's a different job that he has, which is what's NASA going to be with the advent of commercial? with how busy space is. Even the question of nuclear power in space. I don't know. Tell me more about why we need that. The Russians had a nuclear powered satellite back in the 80s. And while power and space is always an issue for spacecraft, it doesn't feel like our missions are failing because we can't power them. And so why is that an imperative for NASA? They're all fine, and none of them will be enough if he hasn't defined what NASA is going to be. What lane do they have? How important is civil space? I think those are his big questions, and if he can do that and make it compelling, all these other things will tend to follow behind.
What role would you have it play? Would you have him as an integrator, as an inventor?
I'd have him as inventor science. I happen to love exploration, what we learn when we go further out, when we live in the environment, when we see what the environment can do. Listen, so much of what we can imagine doing in terms of pharmaceuticals with the advantages of zero gravity comes from what NASA did with human exploration and the experiments they did on the space station and the shuttle. Having presence and pushing the boundaries and understanding the environment is not just noble, but it has turned out to be the way you get real use advantage. If everyone is near in, then you just tend to not get the next. And so I like NASA as our explorers with an idea of what we still need to understand in order to advance the quality of human activity.
A lot of folks are comparing him to Dan Golden
Mhm.
back in 1992. He also came from a commercial background and widely seen as an industry outsider to come in and shake up NASA's culture. Best known for pushing faster, better, cheaper philosophy.
Dan did a lot of things, and he did a number of things in terms of being a real voice for all the participants that needed to be in space and not being just so wedded to the national security complex that their primacy of the domain carried everything. He was a real advocate in terms of how we deconflicted GPS and frequencies and things like that. So if he were a Dan Golden who thought about the practicality of the integration between what we need to do from civilian space and in the other ones to keep a counterbalance to the national security needs, I think that could be awesome. I don't think he quite has the pedigree that Dan had coming out of TRW, so I'm not sure what particular expertise he has in the business of managing large institutions and effectively creating cultural and organizational change. But I think Dan did show as a NASA administrator that was primarily a doer, right? An industrial doer. He did come in and he did introduce that expertise into what had historically been a very scientific culture. And I think it had great effect. I don't know that this administrator has quite the same heft of experience. He is the new NASA administrator. He owns that space. The president has said, and we'll talk a little bit about that in terms of this new age of space achievement. I
Yeah.
would just want him to say, okay, then what does NASA need to be? Because NASA owns some space. What does it need to be in order to be a facilitator of that? And I think he needs to be the one who articulates that and then builds to it, not just says, I'm going to doge NASA, which is a fine thing, but only a good thing to do after you know what it's trying to become.
Yeah. Go get him.
Yeah.
You can do it.
I think I would have loved to have been the NASA administrator.
Seems like a cool job.
Yeah, totally, right? What a great heritage. What great smarts behind it. And what a great opportunity for the reasons that we've set up this segment is it is not just a nerdy space for futuristic play. I mean, this is real infrastructure support. What a fun time.
Yep. And to validate some new
Yep.
technologies and push them over to the commercial sector.
Yep.
Yeah. You mentioned the space policy or the space plan. There was an executive order December 18th called Ensuring American Space Superiority. It's a bill as an America First space agenda, keeps the U.S. leading in exploration. Some of the big milestones it highlighted were the return of Americans to the moon by 2028. I think we're planning on doing a manned loop around the moon next year, 2026. Start building the first elements of a permanent lunar outpost by 2030, deploy nuclear reactors to the moon, including a lunar surface reactor, ready for launch by 2030. And on the security side, it's calling for improved ability to detect and counter threats from the very low Earth orbit and for prototype next gen missile defense technologies by 2028. And it explicitly leans into this, again, Jared Isaacman's style priorities of more commercial participation, including pathways to replace ISS by 2030, and a target for attracting $50 billion in additional private investment by 2028, with White House science tech leadership coordinating implementation and procurement streamlining.
I'm going to be in the same place I have been with a lot of the other things the administration has put out. I think there are goodness in articulating our intention, and I think the narrative does signal confidence to allies and markets that commercial scale and national purpose align. I think that's fundamentally a good thing, and particularly markets are really looking for a signal that the government is going to be a reliable partner that is going to year over year put resources behind it and is going to provide a signal of what they need to produce. I mean, that's how this engine works, right? Big quests, the narrative signals that. And I'm going to be a broken record on this. The governance and coordination lag behind technical achievement. And let's just take the issue of, I don't know if we're going to talk about the dogfighting in space, but it's mentioned in the space achievement in terms of, understanding the situation and being kind of threat awareness. Okay, tell me how that's going to work. Everyone is building inspectors and everyone is building offensive capabilities. How do you determine the difference between an inspector and an actor? When do you act? What's the authority? Can you act on only nationally flagged assets? Can you go against commercial? So I like that the narrative is signaling that this is where we're going with enough specificity to imagine what people can build against and what allies and partners can say, we can provide that capability to you. I guess I'm exhausted with the potential of technology that we never create a snowball effect, that it turns into an outcome that is fundamentally different. I would hope that what follows the White House, new age of space achievement is a set of actions that are going to get us to actually have the ability to work together. Because if you don't, there are kind of three misses you can do. One, you can have technology that's almost right because you didn't articulate the requirements. You can have technology that never gets into use because it doesn't have the ecosystem around it. Because what people tend to build is the thing that goes into it, and somehow expecting that the whole ecosystem of launch surveillance, communications, governance, deconfliction is going to be constructed for them. What I would have in all of these sessions say what you need to look for next if it's really going to make a difference is starting to see work on space policy, space governance, to go along with the technical articulation of what capabilities we need.
Yeah, it almost seems like getting the nuclear reactors to the moon is going to be some form of trickle-down science, right? We did this, and now what other applications can we apply it to, or what springboard can we do, versus the real policy that needs to be done is the deconfliction of the satellites.
Yeah, and as far as moon basing goes, I mean, returning to the moon is a great thing. I think there's probably an overblown assessment of the value of what the assets on the moon are. And I don't know that we've articulated why we need a presence on the moon, how that is a better outposting than on-orbit outpost based on the technologies that are available. So again, I feel like at the end of the year, I'm sounding like a broken record where we keep on saying the things we want to do rather than the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. What is the point of an outpost on the moon? And I fear, and again, with this administration, I think that there's decent reason to fear it, that activities will be more symbolic than resultant. Things to look for, start hearing a national dialogue about the importance of that to human activities, to national imperatives. Not just it's important that we own space, it's important that we do it so that we can achieve this other purpose.
Other thing we wanted to call out was that Rocket Labs
Yeah.
had just been awarded $816 million Space Force contract. from the Space Development Agency to design and build 18 satellites for the Tracking Layer Tranche 3 of the Proliferated Warfighter Space Architecture. The company says that the spacecraft will carry missile warning tracking sensors aimed at providing persistent global tracking of advanced threats, including hypersonic. They also highlight that it's going to use Starlight space protection sensors to harden the constellation against directed energy threats, and notes it may supply subsystems to other primes,
Yeah.
pushing the value of this contract upwards of $1 billion. What do you think about this new player in the orbital game?
Well, it certainly fits what this administration has been pushing for, and I think actually everyone's pushing for is we have had such a great historical dependence on the big primes, the Lockheed Martins, the Northrop Grummans, the Boeings, and before that, Martin Mariettas, and a whole bunch of folks who provided amazing capability. But everyone knows that when you've been doing something for a long time, you become your own entrenched bureaucracy and tend to do it the same way. And what's really exciting about this moment, kind of in terms of national defense technology, is there are so many entrants in the commercial space that have really good ideas and access to the technology that can make a contribution. So that's good news, and it's a push of this administration to bring more of those people in. It has been a push of several, but they seem to be really taking it to a new level. It's interesting, the choice of Rocket Lab. They're much more known as a launch company, and so it's an interesting question about what's the foundation that they're gonna have in order to be able to deliver these capabilities in this timeframe, who they're gonna have to partner with. And it's a little bit
Hmm.
like what you see out of the Andurils and other new players that tend to have not been in the business, but because technology is so abundant, they're able to put a proposal forward of doing something differently. So I think it's cool enough. The only worry I have with new entrants into the market is there is a difference between what is commercially acceptable and commercial failures and what is national security acceptable to national security failures. And sometimes getting those two things to meet where you get the benefit of update speed, availability that comes with commercial, with the reliability and assurance that you wanna have in national security systems. And so sometimes when you have a new entrant, especially with something like a missile defense layer, especially
Hmm.
that it's gonna try and interact with Golden Dome, there will be a lot of learning that has to go on. And so again, just things to watch is, are the contracts on time? Who they're partnering with to be able to do it. So I like that they said, "We think we can be a provider of subsystems to other mission areas." That's great. We ought to reuse that all the time. That's one of the best ideas of new approach to acquisition is stop making everything we develop being a closed system unto itself. So a lot of
Yeah.
good things to like, but there's some risk here because it's a niche-y space trying to satisfy trying to satisfy national security requirements, but good luck to Rocket Labs. They've certainly proven an incredibly worthy launch partner. I'm gonna believe that not only they and their proposals, but the MDA knew what they were doing.
And we do need the resilience
Right.
and the
We
defensive
do.
capability because the US and China military linked satellites are increasingly, this article I'm going to talk about next calls it dogfighting in
Yeah.
orbit, closing distance, changing speed, and jockeying for position to gain surveillance or tactical advantage. So the Washington Post had this article. They recreated a notable 2022 encounter where the U.S. patrol satellite USA 270 was approached by two Chinese satellites, the Cheyenne 12 Tech 01 and 12 Tech 02. And the Chinese craft counter-maneuvered. At one point, they reversed who was tailing and who was in front, and the Top Gun style hit the brakes and they'll fly right by. The article argues it's a shift from traditionally parked satellites to
Yeah.
more maneuverable, refuelable, and potentially swarming spacecraft. Again, this comes back to our congestion and raising the risks of miscalculation as competition. People are jockeying for that specific terrain, whether it's for surveillance or for
Yeah.
communications, and how that escalates. So what was your reaction to hit the brakes and they'll fly right by?
Just it's a great visual. It's a little bit
Of course, these movements take like days
yeah, I
to
was
play
gonna
out,
say,
right?
it's a
So
little bit different in space, and, the movie wouldn't be quite so good because you don't have any sound. All those things would be happening, and you wouldn't get any, crazy sounds,
nice.
but I know that was nerdy. Just a couple things, it's happening. I do think that inspection is kind of a new gray zone of space warfare. to remind the audience when people say gray zone, what they really mean is space that is ungoverned by policy or norms, right?
Hmm.
And adversaries and competitors move into that space because they can operate more freely because the consequence is not as determined. And I would say that inspection in space is one of those gray zones that'll be interesting to see how the international arena decides that it is going to establish the policies and norms around that. Right now, there's a norm on how close you can get. Where's the governance around that? And again, since so many of these things are gonna be governed by algorithms, not by a human, I think you really have to have the rules in place. The other thing I think is that most of the action's not gonna be kinetic. Even when you go to dogfighting, you're gonna go to jamming and dazzling and denying much more than you are gonna be any sort of asteroids type game of blowing things out of the sky. But we're there, right? You just
Hmm.
said people are demonstrating it. It's why we have a Space Force is because that's a more active type of space management and decision making and red versus blue. But I think once again, the technology, the building has beaten the understanding. And now we're kind of racing to catch up and kind of going with our time theme of space that we introduced at the beginning. We are racing to catch up with policy to go with the capability that is just so much faster into action than we are in understanding how it can be governed.
Well, if you developed a governance, you have the enforcement. And is the Space Force the enforcement then?
Well, that's the part of it, right? I mean, great question, but that's it, right? We don't know. And so the issue is gonna come, and I think cyber just is a really good stalking horse for how hard this is. You have commanders that have cyber capabilities that they don't have the authority to use because we don't have the policy around it. You're gonna see that in spades in space because look how long cyber has been part of our warfighting capability.
Yeah.
So, something to watch for, and again, yay capability, but we've got this mismatch between how fast technology's been introduced and how slow we are. Algorithms are catching up, but not the human machine interaction that I think we will want to be necessary when you decide on action against an adversary.
Let's go, NASA.
What a fun time, though, because it's not the super secret world that I started in when it came to space capabilities. This is all going to play out. The average bear can participate in space. You can track objects, you can task imagers. Commercial images are now flipping their cameras around and taking pictures of other on-orbit assets. So this is all playing out in plain view. And so we'll be able to see whether these doctrinal issues are being addressed. You know, we haven't had big collisions in space so far. I don't think that should give us confidence that it's not right around the corner.
Thank you for listening to this special edition of Understandable Insights. Our next full episode drops Tuesday, where we'll break down more ideas shaping how we think and act at the moments they matter.
Thanks for joining us. And as always, remember, we're here for you. And most importantly, go forth, do good, and for goodness sake, be kind to one another.
I've been on my spaceship counting stars since '94, waiting for someone to come and knock on my door, looking for someone who'd be